Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Living Life with James. Today, I have the honor of talking with Justin Gillespie, who is a licensed clinical social worker based out of Detroit. And I want to focus on ADHD. Thinking about ADHD, what if it was more than a diagnosis? What if ADHD was like a superpower? I would love to be able to talk about tips with Justin today and think about maybe how we can learn to thrive and not just survive with ADHD. So help me welcome Justin Gillespie, also known as ADHD Jay on social media. Justin, Jay, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I would love just to kind of hear a little bit about you, a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are now with being this expert in the field of ADHD.
Yeah, so I think my journey goes all the way back to when I was about age 5 or 6. My parents got me in when I was in school. They had like a diagnosis done or an assessment done, whatever, however they done back then. I remember it vaguely being in school, and they came back with the diagnosis ADHD, and this was back in I'm going to guess like 2000 this was probably. So back then the ADHD diagnosis was a lot more stigmatized than it was now. So they kind of got that information. They were like, you don't need that. We're going to deal with it. You're not going to need medication. And we're just going to kind of help you get along your way. We're going to help you learn how your brain works. And I love that as a neurodiverse affirming principle, what I do. I don't love the fact that, then when you get into adulthood, you don't have this big roadmap for yourself later in life is what you're really going to need it for, right? And that's what a lot of people don't think about, right? So they didn't want me to have the diagnosis because of stigma. They didn't want me to have the diagnosis because of the risk of addiction, which is debunked by a lot of evidence-based research now, right? But back then, if you put your kid on stimulants, you were going to turn into an addict, basically, was the stigma back then. And there was a small amount of truth back then, too, just because of the overprescription of medications. I would actually see my peers often drugged out on many drugs as they were just like zoning out. So there's a little bit of like societal truth with it, but it was kind of like evolving away from the 80s. So it was this weird like time where like things were changing, but not fully. So there was a lot of misrepresentation and there was a lot of stuff going on. So anyway, went about my life. And I didn't really come across this thing called ADHD again until I was about 23, where my therapist at the time kind of came back with it. And they were originally thinking that I was possibly bipolar, which is a big thing that I work with now. I work with a lot of women who have actually been misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder. He ended up changing his diagnosis very quickly after just getting to know me a little bit more, thankfully. And he realized, oh, this is really just like severe or moderate or whatever you want to call it ADHD, right? So for me, it was kind of like, all right, I've heard that word before, whatever. Kind of went through life for a little bit as a therapist. At this point, I am a therapist in this time. And I'm just like, okay, ADHD makes me forgetful and quirky and all that. And as I learned,
I love that you just used the word quirky. That's really important.
Yeah. So I just made me a little different, made me a little quirky, made me a little, forgetful, spacey, all those fun words we like to think of with ADHD, right? So I'm going about life for a few years, and as I'm learning more about my ADHD, I'm kind of accidentally collecting my at all the jobs I've been to, because I have had more jobs probably than grade levels at this point. Big sign of ADHD right there. But I ended up collecting a lot of ADHD clients just totally on accident because people realized, oh, I work really good with them. So it just kind of like worked with me well, even though at that time I either didn't think I had ADHD or when I did, I didn't think it was that a big deal in life or what have you. How I came
you also
to
have a level of empathy. You have a level of empathy and understanding, which I think really resonates with people. People are connected to that.
Yeah. Well, I have that level of empathy, but I also have that ability to be person-centered too. Because at this time I was also working a lot in addiction too. So I was getting a lot of the individuals who were involved in addiction who had a co-occurring disorder of ADHD. So I was often seeing a lot of people who were on alcohol, cocaine, and then for individuals who also had injuries who also had ADHD, I often saw a lot of people on opiates too, right? So because we're pretty accident prone, not trying to be funny, but we tend to get into some accidents and then you get on painkillers. It's a whole thing, right? So you get to about age 25 in this whole story, and I'm having a conversation with a friend, and I'm at a specialty center at this point, and I'm talking to my friend, and I said, why don't they have centers like this for ADHD?
Mm.
And this particular colleague had a whole, they had ADHD as well. They were a very close colleague of mine at the time, right? And we kind of had this like 2-hour conversation. And I went home that night and I just mapped out business planned back in 2019 what my therapy center would look like for ADHD. And then I did what all ADHDs do, and I just kind of shoved that to the side and went about my life and went on some other journey until about 3 years later when I ended up getting fired from a job. And so I just kind of decided that at that moment, once I got fired, I kind of have to take my destiny in my own hands. So I took a job that I didn't want to go into after I got fired. I said, I'm going to be here for 6 months. And I'm going to either go into my group practice and then eventually evolve my private practice, or I'm going to leave the field. So I gave myself an ultimatum, and I left that job in 6 weeks. And then the last year and a half has just been crazy.
I mean, you are, blowing up on social media. You just wrote a book, a wealth of experience. I mean, it's amazing to hear your journey and how far you've come and where you are now.
Can I be like so real too? Because I released this book, and the month I release it of all times, I end up getting RSV, right?
Oh, wow.
So if you hear me like with my speech broken up right now, that's why, y'all. But I like had every ADHD barrier going into this, like with this book release recently. Going in with RSV, going in with some publication delays. Like I had every reason, like in my ADHD mind, to be like, let's just like go work on something else right now, because it's just like whatever. But it was just like, yeah, like I like finally kind of like wrote out this compilation of like the roadmap that I really needed for adulthood that nobody really handed me. And not to say that, you're going to solve all of your problems with a book, but it would have been nice to just have someone say, hey, here's a bunch of things you can do probably to make your life like a little easier.
You know what stands out for me? I appreciate you saying that. And I love that you said, I'm going to keep it real with you for a second. I'm always using that in therapy. Let's keep it real.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I feel like when I'm watching your content, on social media, it's those moments. It's the keeping it real moments and just being authentic. And that's what shines. So I appreciate you saying that. And it's really helpful. And I love the tips that you have. And thinking of tips, as something that you've dealt with, you help navigate, and all of the clients that you've worked with, what do you say are maybe some of the top tips that you throw out there for managing ADHD?
I would say one of the top tips that I do is, first of all, learn to put a 3-second delay on your reaction. So I do a lot of this for impulsivity control. So if you can learn how to, in your head, be like 1, 2, 3, 1 to prompt the pause, 1 to reflect, and 1 to determine what the next move is, right? Okay. If you can get 3 seconds of just putting this lid on you for a second, right? I have learned that the intense emotions that you feel a lot of the time, or those urges, or whatever you're going through, right? A lot of times that is going to pass by at least 50% or more.
I love this. Jay, I usually say ride the wave, right? Yeah. So that's what you're speaking to. And I love the idea of counting, maybe 1, 2, 3. And as you're counting, you're also saying these things that you're describing, right? Go, say them one more time for me. You said 1, 2, 3, but there were certain markers you said with each one.
Yep. So you have 3 seconds. The first second is literally just to prompt the pause, because you're not going to remember to pause. So you're just pausing for some reason, right? So you have the first second to pause, the second one to just literally take 1 second to reflect, not too deep, just literally bring it in, and then 1 second to determine what the next move is. And then you're going to decide, what you're doing at that point.
Bring it in, and what am I going to do with this?
I'm a firm believer that this strategy not only can help you enhance like your communication, your impulsivity, it can actually get you a lot more money in life. It can get you promotions at work. It can enhance your dating life. It can do so many things for you just by adding that 3-second delay.
It's an all-around life skill to have and to know.
Yeah. And it's so simple, right? Which with ADHD, we have to keep a lot of our strategies simple and direct, right? We don't want to have like a multi-step process to solving something, because then we're trying to remember what was step one, what was step two, right? So just to have something that is quick and simple, that would be one of my best tips. Another one that I do with counting, which also involves 3 seconds, even though it's called the 5-second rule. Are you familiar with Mel Robbins at all?
Yes, I am. Love Mel
Okay.
Robbins.
Okay. Mel Robbins is the best. So she has this book called the 5-second rule, where I actually kind of learned this. And so basically where this rule comes from, it comes from metacognitive therapy. So I went down a whole rabbit hole back in like January of like learning all these things about metacognitive therapy and all this stuff, right?
Mhm.
So the 5-second rule is essentially something to help you prompt action. So for ADHDers, we're often struggling with task initiation, right?
Okay.
So if I can go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So watch this. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So see how it's like 3 seconds still. But 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, like a rocket ship. You're going to count. Then you're going to say what your next move is impulsively. So you're turning impulse into instinct. So you're going to count, say, and then you're going to move, as in move your body. So if you're overwhelmed with cleaning the house, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go get the dishes done. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go find the vacuum, right? It doesn't have to be the right first step, because that's another thing why we don't get started. We think of what is the first priority? What should I start first? I'm overwhelmed, so I'm not going to start anything, right? So the first step is whatever you need to do to get the thing done or get started. That's what you're going to do. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go get that thing. You're going to count this out loud. You're going to say this out loud. We're going to get into my third tip in here in 1 second with this too. But you're going to count it out loud. You're going to say it out loud. And when you move your body, you're changing your physiology too. So your body's sending a lot of electronic shocks to your brain, sending new messages to the brain. It's now saying, oh, I've moved in this direction. I'm going to get up now. And so it'll increase your likelihood of actually completing the task that you feel you need to be doing.
You know, I love this. I love hearing, and that's why I love engaging and talking to different professionals, because there's so many different approaches. I'm familiar with kind of like a 2-minute rule, right? When you're thinking about setting aside 2 minutes to get a task done and breaking it down, essentially, as I always say, kind of baby steps, right? We have to simplify things because it can become overwhelming. But to hear this is another strategy. This is a great approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, one of the things that I'll do with my clients too is, especially for the ones that are on Zoom, if they're overwhelmed by their environment at home, I will actually tell them, like, what are you overwhelmed by? What do you think needs to be done after this, whatever? And they'll look around their home, or they'll look around their room, or wherever they're at. And they will be like, oh my God, I have this trash to pick up. I have to go fold this. I go or whatever. I will tell them in our sessions, okay, I'm going to start a timer for 2 minutes. I want you to go do whatever you feel you need to do right now. And I'm just going to set it for 2 minutes, and I want you to report back. And then what I do is I have them report everything back, and I ask them, in that 2-minute time, did you finish more than you expected, or did you finish less than what you expected? I would say about 3/4 of my people, they finish that stuff in less time than they thought. So they got more done essentially than they would have thought they would have taken that 2 minutes to do. They don't think 2 minutes is enough time to get something through significant, because that's how we increment time. That's what we tell people. This will only take 2 minutes. Doing those dishes will only take 2 minutes. Well, sometimes if we get accurate in the timing, right? That thing only takes 20 seconds. That thing only takes whatever. But in our brain, we've conditioned a default time to do for each task.
And listen, sorry, I was just going to jump in and say somebody, actually anybody, but specifically with ADHD, the reality is 2 minutes sounds doable. I can attain that, right? So if you get done more, that's more amazing. But 2 minutes, I can take that on.
Well, sometimes it takes a little bit of convincing for people with ADHD too, because sometimes what'll happen is if you give them 10 minutes, it's too long. If you get into 2 minutes, that's like not significant enough. Why would I even start on anything? Like, it's just not gonna whatever, right? So one of the things that we have to do is we have to really condition ourselves to think a little more positively or neutrally about ourselves. And I know, and I say neutrally for a reason. So one of the things that I have people do is, if we're practicing positive mindset work, I have them speak their stuff out loud. A lot of times, a lot of therapists, what they'll do, they'll say, you know, the traditional CBT, replace a negative thought with a positive thought about yourself or whatever, right? Well, there's 2 flaws with this. First of all, your thoughts are only as strong as they are in your head right now, which means if you have a negative thought that's stronger than a positive thought, if you just continue to think the positive thought is still weak. It doesn't have any reinforcement. And the other side of this too is going to be that if there's a thought in your head, you need to actually reformulate a new thought, which means you have to give it a new thought. So if you have a positive thought that you want to speak out loud, right? You speak it out loud. I'm very proponent on speaking things out loud. your brain processes sound differently as new information, even if it's heard that same information before. Now, the key in this is that you have to believe the information you're speaking, right? So this is why I say, if you don't have anything positive to say about yourself, say something neutral about yourself.
I mean,
Something that's just more
we're right there. I love this approach because I have so many clients, and we talk and we even laugh at the idea of, not being able to be Miss Polly positive. It can be really difficult at times to try to come up with something that may be positive if you're ruminating or in a dark space. So this idea of being neutral, again, I think it's brilliant. I always tell people sometimes coming up with the idea that I'm doing my best. That can be neutral. What can you give an example for yourself or something you may describe with clients that would be neutral?
Yeah, so this would be something where I've worked with somebody with an eating disorder before. So a lot of this is body image work, right? So if somebody is saying, I'm ugly, I'm this, I'm that, whatever, right? Naturally, the first thing is to say, no, you're beautiful, you're pretty, you're handsome, you're whatever, right?
May not feel right.
Yeah, if you don't feel that about yourself, it's going to really just fuck you up, excuse my language, but it's going to fuck you up hearing that, right? So what's going to happen is I would take, instead of saying, you're all these different compliments, we would come up with neutral terms. So they came up with, today I'm healthy. Today I am nourished. Today I am active. I'm more active than I ever was. Or what have you, right? So these are things that are more neutral. They're more facts-based. They're not just a lie that you're trying to convince yourself.
They're fitting to your situation. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So one of the other things, as you're saying all this, it's making me think of, the 2-minute rule and these other tips you're giving. Also, how some people may be able to start the morning with one intention for the day. Yeah. Being able to have one goal to say, this is how I'd like to kind of get my morning rolling, almost like we're going to build momentum off of that. If I was to pick one small thing to start the morning with.
Yeah, exactly. So this is kind of where the 2-minute rule kind of comes in a little bit more. So one of the things that I work with a lot of people on is how to capitalize on that 2-minute time, right? And so there's about 3 ways I've come up with on how this would best work for most people's situations, right? So the first one would be the one we're talking about right now is you start your day with something, right? You have 2 minutes to really start your day. What is your plan from like the second you wake up? What are we going to be doing, right? And that can work for some people, but I can see where that could be overwhelming for others, right? So then the next option is, what am I doing for 2 minutes at the end of my day where I can just go to my bed and I can just pass out after, right? So that could be great, except there's certain tasks you're probably not going to want to do, right? So this is where this fluctuates a little bit. If you have to clean up your apartment or like take out the trash real quick, you probably don't want to just go to bed right after you've like played with the trash a little bit, right? So the third option is, instead of ending your day, it can be when you transition back into your home, right? And this is for obviously home tasks we're talking about right now. But something I do with people is task pairing, which is where they come back into the home and you're associating a task with a habit you've already established. So this is something where like you're coming into the home, maybe you put your keys on that table right next to the door, or maybe you hang up your coat right here or whatever. There's things that we do every day we don't actively think about doing. We just do them habitually, right? Mm-hmm. So I help them figure out like what exactly are your natural habits and what can we just include in those natural habits to enhance your daily life. So that way you don't even have to think about doing this task, especially after a couple times trying it.
The underlying goal that I'm picking up, there's something about feeling productive, right? Especially when our brains are all over it and it's hard to sometimes focus on one thing. If we're able to have the 2 minutes beginning or end of the day, if I feel productive, that definitely affects us.
It does. It absolutely does. And so I always say with like the more productive that you can feel or experience, right, the better that you are going to just feel throughout your day of self-esteem. Now, this is where we have to turn around a little bit and get into the more neurodiverse affirming principles, which is we have to simultaneously hold that belief and also believe you are not meant to be productive 100% of the time. Right? You need to give yourself grace. You need to give yourself that opportunity to recharge. You do not have to have a clean house. If you want a clean house, why do you want a clean house? Why do you want to function this way? Why do you want to do this? And then you adapt it from there to make it work for how their operations work.
You just hit the nail on the head, Jay. I want to sit with that for a second because I can see how when you're going through this, you sometimes put so much pressure and there's expectations. This can be overwhelming. So I want to pause with this idea of grace. I often tell my clients to extend yourself some grace. I love that you said that, because this is a lot to take on. There's a lot of kind of tools and tips here. It's a learning experience. As you also said, we're conditioning the brain. We're reconditioning the brain in some cases. So to extend that grace is so important through this.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times with CBT, right, we have the thoughts that interfere with the feelings that affect the actions, and the actions, of course, go to the feelings. What I find a lot of therapists do is they immediately go to the thoughts, because usually if you look at the CBT triangle, right, the thoughts are the things that are on top, and our brains naturally think of whatever's on top. That's a starting point. But if you look at how CBT works, it's actually a cycle, right? It's a cycle where you can start anywhere. Right. So instead of going into the thoughts, I find going into the actions is a lot easier than just going into the thought patterns.
Give me an example. What do you mean by that?
Well, even just with the example of, building habitual habits, right? If you're naturally already, like, let's say, brushing your teeth in the morning, right? If you're somebody who is forgetting to take your ADHD meds, let's say, and that's a regular thing for you, a habitual habit that you can compare it with is, well, I brush my teeth, I'm already by water, I'm already kind of by the sink, I can just keep my med bottle right at the sink, I'm going to take my pills right before I brush my teeth.
That's the action.
And I'm less likely to forget. Another thing for this would be, if you were to, now this takes a little bit of steps to remember, but if you can remember to put a glass of water by your bed at night, and then you go to bed and then set an alarm 45 minutes before you wake up, you set the alarm, you're naturally used to setting an alarm, waking up, and the pills are right there, the water's right there, you take your pills, and now you get to go to sleep for 30 or 45 more minutes. And here's a bonus effect to this one. By the time you wake up, the meds kick in finally. So it's about to just literally editing the actions you're already taking, and just therefore, once you edit the actions, the thoughts are going to start to clear up. So often a thought that we have is, oh, this won't work because. That's a very common with ADHD. We're very much people that are focused on what's not going to work. And so if I were to go straight into the thoughts, I'd have to try to deconstruct all of that. And that's a hard brick wall to go through.
It's even overwhelming as you say that.
You said what?
I said it's even overwhelming as you say that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, if I'm gonna start with the thoughts, right, that means I'm now going into years upon years upon years of habits that you've done and possible trauma too, right? Now, if we're going to go in a trauma lens, then maybe we would go into the thoughts a little bit more. But if you're coming to me to see me for executive functioning, if I need to get this done, we're going to start with the actions and show you that you can actually do this more than you think. And I'm not even going to have to tell you can do it, because I'm just going to give you these tidbits, or you're going to figure out these little tidbits for yourself. And then your thoughts are going to start to automatically change. And then maybe we can go into the thoughts a little bit deeper and then go into that stuff.
Yeah, this is, and again, I think you meet each person where they are, right? And
yeah,
and for you to say that, I operate with cognitive behavioral therapy myself. So I appreciate you saying that, because there's something to be said about going to the action opposed to the thought, especially with somebody that can get overwhelmed by all of this. That could be an intense workout in itself, just to challenge and go through all those thoughts. So to say something, to reference that example again, have the water by the bed, have the meds by, the bathroom sink. These are all, it just feels doable. It feels like I can attain this.
Yeah, you can attain that. And it's just subtle changes too. It's nothing like super overwhelming. But it's also trial and error too, right? So you really have to figure out what actually is going to work. Because a lot of times we're just so focused on fucking up or forgetting to do something, we just think nothing's going to work. So it's like, okay, why don't we try to see if this is going to work? A big stereotype, actually, a lot of people with ADHD have is, using the planner. I know some ADHD people, they're about to start groaning right now, right? Because they're like, we hate planners. I hate them too, right? But there's different ways that you can either learn to use a planner, or you can use something that's kind of like a planner, but not, or you come up with your own planner, or maybe you don't use a planner. But what I find is a lot of people, they've tried a planner maybe a couple times in their life, and it just didn't work. So they just kind of threw it away, or they lost it, or whatever the case may be, right? So one of the things I'll do with people is, if they have trouble with scheduling, planning their life, prioritizing, I will have them start with the planner. They groan at me. It's like, I know this is not going to work at first. I need to though have you just try this and actively tell me what went wrong. So first of all, I'm giving them the permission to fuck up by doing this exercise, right?
Yeah.
So you start with going into a task that I know I'm going to fail with and saying that's fine, right? That's addressing an action, which is then again going to address a thought. So then they come back and they tell me all the things that went wrong with the planner, and we will plan a whole new prioritization strategy based on what went wrong to what works with their strengths and how their mind actually
You have to
operates.
go
Just
through that
because
process in order to find it, right? You have to
exactly,
start somewhere.
and it's because we went in to determine why this didn't work. A lot of times they'll come in, I just hate planners. I don't ever stick to them or whatever. Okay, so why don't we stick to them? Is it because the lines on the paper are small and maybe you don't like to write on small lines? Is it because you're more of a digital person and maybe you need like a Google calendar or an Outlook calendar or what have you,
But
right?
you're helping them get there, Jay. And that's why I'm so thankful to have this time with you, because I want people to hear, no matter what stage of life you're in, anyone that's dealing or knows someone that's dealing with ADD, that there are tools. What you're describing right now, there are tips to use. There's hope, because this can be an overwhelming topic. People sometimes don't know who to turn to, what to use, what to implement. So just hearing these strategies here, it feels lighter knowing if you're
Yeah,
going through this, that there's support and guidance for something like this.
absolutely. No, I completely agree with that.
You know, I heard you describing your story, and I wanted to just talk about kind of the onset of ADHD and how people go through this and how it can look different at different stages, from childhood to adolescence to even adulthood. Some people aren't getting diagnosed until their 30s and 40s, and these people are living with ADHD and not necessarily knowing what's happening with them. So to be able to understand and know kind of what's at the root of this and how to be able to deal with this is so important.
It is. No, absolutely. Yeah, my experience is mainly with adults with ADHD, right? I have like kids and teens I see, but a lot of my experience is with adults with ADHD. In fact, our practice is over 50% adults.
Mhm.
And out of those adults, 66% of them are women at the moment, right?
Interesting.
So to have a disorder that often is looked at as a disorder for little boys, little young children, age 5 to 8, right? And have it be adult women, it completely redefines the narrative.
For those adult, I was going to say for those adult women, for those adults in general, what's one of the top tips that come to mind when you think of how you can work with them, or something you would like for them to know? The listeners out there that are adults that are thinking, "Gosh, I could have ADHD."
It's a good okay, that's a good question. So I would say probably a top tip that I would give for the adult specifically is you have to learn to be okay with fucking up. You
Mhm.
have to learn the skill, right? If you go through life and you're so afraid to fuck up, you're going to ironically continue to fail at life the rest of your life,
Mhm.
because you're not analyzing or looking into yourself intrinsically or mindfully that, hey, this is happening for a reason, right? Instead, you're just avoiding failure completely, right? And to be fair, this is also a learned behavior sometimes that we have to reconstruct in therapy, right? Because a lot of times with these adults, their parents were removing the barriers to failure for them, right? So in my particular case, my parents were, very much making sure I wasn't going to fail. They were on me about homework all the time, right? So I
Mhm.
was doing homework till like 10, 11 sometimes. And by the way, I still wasn't finishing it, by the way, because I wasn't able to keep focused or whatever. But they would be on me about it, right? And on top of it, I had teachers that were extra flexible. They were, which just sounds like a great thing, right? And it is, right? I'm thankful for them for this part. But they were extra flexible. They saw I was a nice kid and they just let me turn in stuff late anyway. And they were just like, yeah, whatever, it's fine, right? So I didn't experience consequence and I didn't experience failure because of that. I experienced a lot of stress because I was up till 10, 11, 12 at night as an adolescent or even younger trying to do homework.
Well, and
And
Jay, as you're saying all this, what I'm hearing is it's okay. It's okay to mess up. It's okay to have these moments. The other side of that is I need to gain. I need to gain tools, tips, strategies to be able to navigate this as I go forward. Something that's going to work for me, something that's going to work in my favor to be able to navigate, whether it's taking medications, chores around the house, right? Getting stuff done.
yes, absolutely.
You know, one of the biggest things I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts with some of my clients, we talk about emotional regulation, right?
Mhm.
Regulating those emotions. And I'm sure it's something that we see with people that are living with ADHD, how do I regulate my emotions, whether it's having anger outbursts, whether it's living with just heavy amount of frustrations and irritability, how to be able to cope and regulate emotions. I'm just wondering, kind of like, what are your thoughts? Have you experienced it? Do you experience it in your private practice? And what do you say about emotional regulation as it relates to ADHD?
Well, first and foremost, that's why the 3-second delay we talked about earlier is going to be so important, right? Because that's the filter, that's the cap, right?
Yeah.
Emotional regulation is all about being able to stop, either breathe. I know some people don't like breathing with ADHD, but maybe stop, breathe, take a rest, and literally just pause and then go, right? It does not have to be that long, that lengthy, but you need to learn how to not act. And that's the thing with emotional regulation, is our nervous system is going off so quickly that our brain is now telling us we need to act. We have to do something. We have to say something, because we're either trying to resolve something or we're trying to win, quote unquote, in a sense, right? If we're talking about an argument or anger or what have you. But sometimes the best action that you can do is to literally stop, think. So pause your speech, 1, 2, 3, and then respond. Maybe that response is going to be something like, you know what, I'm not even sure what to do right now, and so maybe I'm going to go work on something else. Can we come back to this in about 20 minutes?
So really needing to get down the idea of the 3-second rule. It's really beneficial.
It's honestly a really easy to go to, right? Because it's not long at all, but it prompts you to stop and just determine, like, oh wait, I'm allowed to give my permission to stop, even with all the craziness going on. Another thing I like to think of for emotional regulation too, I forget the phrase you said earlier, how you call it. I call mine though, I call mine the storm. So I always think of like a thunderstorm or a severe thunderstorm or a tornado or something like that. And there's different categories of storms when it comes to emotional regulation. So sometimes you have a tornado, the sirens go off. What do? You have to go down to the basement. You have to hunker down. So maybe that's what you do. You disassociate, you go away. You need to like be separated from everything for a minute, right? That's totally fine. You're not going to do that on a sunny day. That doesn't make sense, right? You're not just going to be hunkered in, scared, or something's going amiss. But if there's like a big crisis going on and you kind of, all you can do is wait it out, then maybe you just wait it out, right? Whereas a thunderstorm level of emotional regulation, that's more of like, okay, I'm not going to go play in the rain. I'm not going to go entertain this thing right now, but I can also go about my life right now. I can kind of like continue to do stuff, even though things don't feel so great right this second.
So are you saying I need to take a step back and almost take inventory of what level, what category, what kind of storm? How do you go about that?
Yeah, literally just take a step back and determine, like, is this a hunker down situation? Is this a take action situation? So I almost think of like a take action situation, almost like a hurricane, where it's probably going to be more severe than a thunderstorm or even a tornado, but you have some time to see this is coming, right? So maybe you have to go gather the supplies. Maybe you have to determine what you're going to go do. Whether that is, are we, metaphorically or maybe literally evacuating or, what have you. Shout out to our Florida people and everyone down south right now. I hope you all are safe right now. But like, it's just, you have to kind of determine like what level of emotional storm is happening right
That's
now.
a great reference. And I love a good reference to kind of give us this idea. Jump back. I use the term riding the wave. We know
there it is. There it is.
We know this is going to pass, but what are we going to get through, right? This is temporary, but what are we going to do to get through this?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So thinking about, these tools, these strategies, great way or description of how the 3-second rule to be able to help us emotionally regulate. I always kind of add in there too, the chemicals start kicking in our brain and being able to use our senses to be able to regulate, whether it's, taking deep breaths with maybe a scented hand lotion or soap, walking, having some physical activity, getting some ice cold water or your beverage of choice, something to kind of help bring us back and keep us in the moment, ground us, if you will, as we're going through that.
Oh man. I love this one. In fact, I had a big kick over the summer where I got a lot of men with ADHD that experienced a lot of anger or frustration. So one of my favorite things to do is I always reference it back to the home, because I feel like the home is almost like this thing that harbors all the frustration for the most part, right? It's almost like this thing that keeps it all in. even though it's like your home, right? So
Mm.
a lot of these men were getting frustrated in their homes, whether it was because of their partners or their kids or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I would have them do is I would actually have them go into their kitchen and I would just have them grab something frozen. They would get like some peas that have been just sitting there for a month, right? And just like grab onto it. And I told them if you feel really weird, put it on your face even, right? You know, or whatever. Another thing I like to do now that the season is changing, depending on what states you're in, right? You know, it's getting fall, we're getting into winter, things are starting to cool down. I like to take advantage of it and have a double whammy because I love getting outside when I'm angry or I'm upset because I'm probably not going to have a meltdown on the lawn, first of all.
Right. Well, the physical movement, right?
Yeah, the physical movement,
Mhm.
low key, the societal pressure. Because again, you're not going to scream and stuff with the neighbors out, but you're going to regulate a little bit more,
Yeah.
right? But also the temperature. The temperature right now is at a perfect place where, in a lot of states and a lot of different countries, depending on where you're located, it is cooling down to where you could use the natural environments around you to just change your setting. And all it could just be is you just need a 10-degree difference to help cool your nervous system.
100%. 100%. Jay, thank you for the tips. Thanks for your experience. It was great talking with you.
Thank you.
Anybody that would love more information, please feel free to reach out to ADHD Jay. He's on Instagram. I'm sure that they can get in contact with you through Instagram as well if they have any other questions or would like to follow up or are interested in your book, which is also available on Amazon. I thank you. Can you think of anything else going out that, you know, as this is actually ADHD month, but I always like to say and beyond, because this is something that shouldn't just be, you know, set to one particular month. This is something that people deal with on a daily basis. So this is so important while we're presenting it in the month of October, that this is information that, you know, definitely needs to play for everyone throughout the year.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I was so impressed with the fact that Paris Hilton acknowledged ADHD Awareness Month in a recent Instagram post. That was really cool to see.
Cool.
I've never seen a celebrity even acknowledge it. So that was awesome. I would say to leave things off, especially for my adult listeners, this is the era where you really need to stop listening to your parents. You need to stop listening to society. You need to stop listening to those expectations that have been put upon you. And the main thing about this is that you need to start doing things for yourself and you need to stop being afraid of looking childish. So what I mean by that is we're often trying to play pretend as ADHD adults. We're often trying to present ourselves as adults, even though we're adults, but we're presenting we're adults. Because really I like to say we're just really big giant children with more developed brains and a higher sex drive now, usually, right? That's usually what I call us.
That's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah, we literally we're the same people, but biologically just a few things have changed, right? So with us, we often with ADHD especially, we often have a lot of the same interests. Maybe some of them fell off, but a lot of stuff we do like, right? In return with that, oftentimes a lot of the time you'll find that the interventions that worked for you as a child, they will work for you as an adult. Just make some small modifications with it, right? So if you remember your adult saying, all right, go to the corner and count down. What do you think I'm doing? What do you think I'm doing with the 5-second rule or the 3-second delay? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? So a lot of times we're thinking that we just have to get it together because that's what adults do. And a lot of times that's what our parents are saying us to do, right? You have to get a real job or you have to do this or do that because that's what adults do. No, you have to learn how you function and what you actually want out of life. And you need to just stop listening to everyone around you and start listening to what you actually need.
That was the perfect way to go out on, right? I appreciate your insights. It's so helpful. As you're saying that, my wheels are turning because I'm thinking about 5 other things and more tips that I would love to get. But these are follow-up conversations. One of the things going through my mind is just being an ADHD adult and navigating through relationships, or actually adolescence and navigating through relationships. But that'll have to be maybe a topic for another time. Mm-hmm. I so appreciate you. I would love to be able to have a follow-up talk with you. Thank you for your insight. You have so much, a wealth of wisdom, and I'm sure the viewers will appreciate it. So Jay, thank you for everything. Best of luck with your book out there. And I look forward to maybe having some follow-up conversations with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.